Let's talk about sweeping, and in particular, let's have a look at it from a conceptual perspective. Think back to the last time you successfully swept someone or you fell victim to a sweep. Okay, I guarantee there was 4 actions that took place, 4 components that are almost imperative that they exist, otherwise the sweep will not be successful. If you try to sweep someone in the past and it failed, I guarantee that one of these 4 sort of core components, if you like, 4 principles is missing. And the last time you stopped being swept, again, one of the 4 components that your opponent should have administered during the sweep was missing. Okay, so let's have a look at those 4 components. Number 1, and these are in no particular order. These can happen independently and in different orders as you attempt to sweep someone or they attempt to sweep you. A sweep has to involve you taking away your opponent's ability to post. Okay, so their ability to stop the sweep, whether it's using their hand on the mat or using their legs in base to stop you from sweeping them. So you have to take away the post. Okay, the next thing that has to be apparent is the position of your hips relative to their hips. So we ideally want to get our hips as close as we possibly can underneath our opponent's hips, or as close as we possibly can over the top of our opponent's hips. The closer we can achieve that, the easier our sweep will become. So number 1, we need a post to be taken away. Number 2, our positioning is imperative. Number 3, we have to have the ability to pivot, to rotate our opponent. Okay, so that will come about as a result of where we're gripping and how we're gripping. But we have to be able to pivot our opponent's body in order to off-balance them. And the 4th thing is the projection, whether we're projecting ourselves or we're projecting our opponent through space. So that we could call these the 4 Ps: post, position, pivot, projection. Okay? If one of those 4 things is missing or not managed well enough, your sweep will fail. Okay? So you can look at this one of 2 ways. If you're trying to sweep an opponent and you understand things a little bit better from a conceptual framework point of view, make sure these 4 things are in place. Okay? And to stop being swept, make sure that you don't allow your opponent to achieve the capture or the administration of one of those 4 things. Okay, so we have the ability to remove a post, a potential post, the positioning of our hips relative to our opponent's hips, have an ability to pivot or rotate our opponent through space, and be able to project them using our legs, which is essentially your guard. So let's run through a few examples and we'll talk you through each one of those 4 examples so it's a little bit clearer in your brain. Okay, so sweep number 1, and we're going to show you how these 4 properties or 4 components, if you like, interrelate with each other to achieve a successful sweep. We'll start in the full close guard, and the first sweep that we'll demonstrate for these 4 properties is just going to be the scissor sweep. Probably the first sweep you learn in your first jiu-jitsu class. Okay, so I understand that in order to hit a scissor sweep, I have to have my opponent in the correct posture, but let's not worry too much about the technical points involved with the scissor sweep. Let's just drill home these 4 principles for you to be able to have a successful sweep. Okay, so with the scissor sweep, I'm going to grip either a 4-finger pocket grip or a pistol grip. I can have a C grip, some kind of management of his post. If he can put this hand on the floor, I can't sweep him. Okay, so my initial grip takes away his ability to post. So check number 1. My second grip for a scissor sweep to occur comes inside his collar in the most basic sense. As long as my second grip has some sort of bias towards this side, I will still have the ability to pivot his shoulders. So I can actually reach underneath his arm and grab the seam of his jacket. Okay, I can trap this arm with both of mine if I wish, but generally, in the most basic sense, I'd be gripping up on his collar. So far, we've taken away his ability to post on the mat, and now the grip that's specific to this sweep eventually will give me the ability to pivot him. Okay, the next thing, I have to obviously, as you know, escape my hips away from the grips. I bring both of my legs into this kind of scissor position in order to do the next part of the sweep. Here's the post. Here's my ability to pivot. Now, if you've ever tried to do a scissor sweep from this position by dropping your leg down and just trying to sweep him, it's incredibly hard. Okay, which brings us to one of the third P, the position. You can see that my training partner's hips are way back there in comparison to mine or relative to mine, which are here. So it's going to be impossible, or at least very, very hard for me to sweep him over. And if I do get a successful scissor sweep from him, it's going to be forced. There's going to be too much muscle involved. Okay, so what I need to do is get his hips above my hips. We can do this in a number of different ways. I can start to push. This is the most basic way. Push with my shin into his stomach, which inevitably is going to force a reaction. And that reaction is going to be for him to push back into me. Well, now look, you can see his hips have risen up. They're not completely above my hips, but relative to where they were before, they're in a better position for my sweep to occur. If we go back again, sometimes he will initiate the push into me. Maybe with his free hand, he grabs my gi, and if my knee is too low down, he'll start to force his hips. Well, by forcing his hips towards me now, he's connected to my shin. So if we do that again, at which point I can pull him forward and bring his hips up. So either way, I've achieved the third of my P's. The first one was to take his ability to post away from him. With that, I combine my second grip. That gives me now the ability to pivot his shoulders, which you'll see later on. The positioning of my body, I start to force a reaction from him, which brings his hips positioned above mine. Okay, the last P is the projection. Well, that's me dropping my leg down here right at the last minute, not too early because he'll step over it, right at the last minute, and then using the connection between my shin and my instep to project him this way as I pivot his upper body. Okay, so if we go back a second, here's the post, here's my ability to pivot. I want to get his hips positioned relative to mine. I drop and I project. Obviously, we follow up and we've just successfully swept our opponent using the scissor sweep. So you will see that those 4 P's are apparent. Post, pivot, position, projection. Let's use another sweep from the same guard, from that full closed guard, but this time the order is going to be slightly different. On the scissor sweep, we took away the post early, okay? With a hip bump sweep, slightly different. If he has his hands on the floor, okay? The first thing I have to really do is to open my guard and sit up over the top of him, okay? I'm not going to be able to get a sweep from this position because my hips are not above his hips. In this case, for a hip bump sweep, we want our hips over the top of him in order to project him, okay? The taking away of the post comes relatively late, as does the pivot, okay? So watch what we do. We sit up, I find my initial connection. My hips ride up, that's the position. I immediately now instinctively start to pivot and project, and at the very last moment, look, I'm taking away his ability to post. So you can see again, those 4 components, those 4 principles of a successful sweep exist in the same technique, but just in a different order. Okay, so as opposed to the scissor sweep where we took away the post early, taking away the post is relatively late with the hip bump sweep. So there's 2 examples from a closed guard. Let's have a look at an open guard. See if that same sort of concept runs true. Let's do butterfly guard. So again, we're not too worried about the technical components of this. Just come forward a little bit. Most of you are aware that we need sticky feet. Our guard needs to be alive. The positioning of my hips relative to my own head and everything else is paramount for the success in this, okay? But now, especially the scissor sweep, we can consider that as a long lever guard. We're using grips at distance. Well, the best grips to use for butterfly guard is it's like a short lever position. So we'd be hand fighting and trying to get into this position to use our short levers or our underhooks. So if I have an underhook on this side, I would need an overhook on this side to create the elevator sweep or the most basic sweep from butterfly guard. Well, you can already see by what we've already described that just by having this overhook here, I've taken away his ability to post on the floor. Okay, so again, we've taken away the post early. Here's my ability to rotate or to pivot him, and my foot that's underneath him, this one on the opposite side, is what's going to be my projection tool. Okay, the final thing then is my position of my hips. So again, we've taken away his post. Here's my ability to pivot. Okay, the projection tool is my left foot in this case. My hips are way out of the way. I can't lift him, he's just too heavy. So I have to scoot underneath to get my hips underneath my opponent's body before I sweep successfully with those 4 things in place. The post was taken away early. The underhook on the opposite side gave me the ability to pivot him. My left foot, the elevator position, was my projection. And the last thing, using my hips like a bit of a shovel to dig underneath my opponent, was the positioning. Okay, so let's do one more from an open guard. This time, the balloon sweep. So this time he's going to be standing up and I'm going to be on my back in this, just come this way slightly, this position. So I'm playing some kind of open guard and say my training partner grabs my trousers, trying to pass my guard. The first thing I've got to do obviously is win back my grips. So I take my 4-finger pocket grips. Already, if I maintain those grips throughout, that's his ability to post on the floor. Next thing I'm going to do for the balloon sweep is kick off my grips, place my feet in his hips. Here. Mold my knees round and keep his hands in my pockets. Taking away his post. Okay, but if I try and do the balloon sweep over my head now, I can't, because relatively speaking, his hips are too far back. So I have to get the position next. Well, how do I do that? I lift my hips up, and as I drop my hips to the floor, I'm going to pull him onto me and just extend. So I've got his post here. My hips are perfectly positioned now. Okay, so how do I pivot? Well, all I do with his arm, and this is where the name comes from for the sweep, is to draw a big balloon. I'm going to do a big circle here, which will bring his head down. I use my feet to project. I follow up into my mount position and get my successful balloon sweep. Okay? So it's important that you understand those 4 essential elements, if you like, of a successful sweep. If you're going to try and sweep your opponent, you need to make sure that those 4 things are apparent the whole way through. Obviously, understand the technique that you're trying to deliver, apply, I should say. So make sure you dial down on how to do a scissor sweep, how to do a hip bump sweep, how to do the terre sweep from butterfly guard, and of course the balloon sweep as well. You still need the technical know-how to be able to pull them off successfully, especially when your training partner is resisting. It's very, very easy to demonstrate when you've got someone being static. So drill down the technique in your head. Generally speaking, people learn in 2 different ways. Okay, you have people that learn in a conceptual sense, which is an example of what we've just discussed there, giving you the simple concepts that have to exist for something to occur. Then you have the other people that I believe is called rote learning, where they're drilling over and over again and being told where to put their hands. So it's drilled and dialed down into their psyche, if you like. You've got 2 very, very distinct people there. You need to discover which one you are and which one you will learn best from. Okay? Having an underlying concept of every single position, every single scenario in Jiu-Jitsu will definitely help. And being able to drill them so that repetitive ingraining in your system needs to be done too. Okay? But practice that with your training partners and sort of get it into your brain that why did my sweep fail? Sometimes there's going to be a technical component that's missing, but more often than not, you forgot one of those 4 key principles, those essential elements, or you just haven't done one of them to the best of your ability. More often than not, at a beginner level, it's the positioning of your hips. You haven't got your hips underneath your opponents to make them light, or you haven't got your hips over the top to project yourself enough. Okay, so keep working through those things and just try and figure out, using those essential elements, the 4 of them, why was I successful? Why wasn't I successful? How come I keep getting swept over and over again? Is it because I keep allowing my post to get taken? It's got to be one of these 4 things. And your job is to either successfully implement it, to be successful in your sweeps, or just ensure that you don't let your opponent take it when you're being swept. Okay, try those then. Let me know how you got on. See you on the mats.